Sunlight is the ultimate source of energy that drives the dynamics of the planet. It is transformed to heat that warms the atmosphere, land surface, and waters of the oceans. It drives the water cycle and causes the currents of air and water to form. Some of these energy are stored, which becomes a source of energy for other living organisms. Energy exists in two forms: potential and kinetic. Potential energy is stored energy. It is capable of and available for performing work. On the other hand, kinetic energy is the energy in motion. The expenditure and storage of energies are governed by the laws of thermodynamics. The first law is the conservation of energy. It states that energy is neither created nor destroyed. No matter what transfers and transformations take place, no gain or loss in total energy occurs. Energy is simply transferred from one place to another. The second law of thermodynamics states that when energy is transferred or transformed, part of the energy assumes a form that cannot pass on any further. Take, for example, a coal burned in a boiler. To produce steam, some of the energy creates steam and some of the energy is dispersed as heat to the surrounding. The same thing happens to energy in the ecosystem. As energy is transferred from one organism to another in the form of food, a portion is stored as energy in living tissue, whereas a large part of the energy is dissipated as heat. The first and basic form of energy storage in ecosystems is referred to as primary productivity. Primary productivity is the rate at which carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or water is converted into organic compounds by autotrophs. Gross primary productivity is the total rate of photosynthesis or energy assimilated by the autotrophs, while net primary productivity is the rate of energy storage as organic matter after respiration. The productivity of terrestrial ecosystems is affected by a number of factors such as climate, temperature, precipitation, and nutrient availability. Places with a higher mean annual temperature supports higher rates of photosynthesis. Precipitation, or the amount of water available to the plant, limits both photosynthesis and the amount of leaves that can be supported. In addition, nutrient availability directly affects ecosystem productivity as it affects plant growth. The combination of warm temperatures and adequate water supply for transpiration gives the highest primary productivity, thus making the tropical rainforest the most productive terrestrial ecosystem. In aquatic ecosystems, light is a primary factor limiting productivity. The depth to which light penetrates a lake or ocean is crucial in determining the zone of primary production. This is because its shallowness allows for a greater transport of nutrients from the bottom to surface, and it receives a large input of nutrients carried from terrestrial ecosystems by rivers and streams. In contrast, net primary productivity in rivers and streams are low because of the low nutrient concentrations.
Although not particularly abundant in the Earth's rocky crust, the element carbon does play a vital role in the presence and evolution of all life on Earth. Starting with some of the smallest molecules, such as proteins and amino acids, up through bacteria, plants, and animals, All life forms, and therefore all organic matter, is made from carbon. It exists in environments both on land and at sea. It presents itself in the grass at our feet and in the food that we eat.
Organic carbon in aquatic ecosystem can come in two forms, namely autochthonous and allochthonous inputs. Autochthonous can be described as organic carbons produced within the ecosystem, while allochthonous are organic carbons outside the ecosystem. In aquatic ecosystem, the autochthonous input can be from photosynthesis of aquatic plants and algae, which are found in shallow water, and phytoplanktons, which are found in open waters. On the other hand, substantial proportions of organic carbons in the ecosystem is allochthonous, which are from dead organic matter from terrestrial ecosystems that enter the water as dissolved in particulate organic matters. Shading of trees may also affect the input of organic carbon in aquatic ecosystems. Abundance of shading from tree limits light and water, preventing growth and photosynthetic activity of phytoplankton and algae. Therefore, it relies on outside source of organic carbon inputs. This mainly occurs in fast streams and small lakes. As the stream travels downward, trees become limited, unable to shade open waters, which promotes the growth of phytoplankton and algae that give way to internal input of organic carbon. It can be said that in large lakes and rivers and most marine ecosystems, majority of organic carbon is derived internally. In contrast, smaller streams and lakes gets organic carbon externally. Energy or carbons which are fixed by plants is allocated to different parts of the plant and to reproduction. Environmental gradient of moisture availability can give plant a response to allocate their energy towards their survival. Reduced moisture condition or low precipitation will give way to allocation of energy towards more on the roots than the leaves of a plant. How much is allocated to each component is a function of plant life form as well as environmental condition. The pattern of allocation directly influences the standing biomass and productivity rates of plants. Primary production in an ecosystem varies with time and age. Seasonal and yearly variations in moisture and temperature directly influence primary production of plants. Regions with cold and extreme dry seasons have periods of plant dormancy where primary production will cease. On the other hand, tropical or wet regions give favorable condition and therefore have little variation of primary productivity within a year. Disturbances such as herbivory and fire can also lead to variations in net primary productivity. Overgrazing by cattle and sheep can reduce net primary productivity, as well as defoliation of forests from insects can lower net primary productivity. Fire in grassland may increase productivity in wet season, but decrease productivity in dry season. Net primary productivity also varies with stand age. In an ecosystem dominated by woody vegetation, net primary productivity declines with age. As a tree ages, they accumulate more woody growth, making trunk and stems thicker and heavier. The ratio of leaves to woody tissue also changes. More and more of the living biomass occurs as woody tissues as trees age, whereas leaf area remains constant or rather declines. As the ratio of woody biomass to foliage increases, more of gross production goes into maintenance. Net primary productivity increases during the early stages of tree development, but declines as the forest ages and biomass increases. Net primary production is the energy available to the heterotrophic component of the ecosystem. Humans or other agents, such as wind or water currents, may disperse the net primary production of any given ecosystem to another food chain outside the ecosystem. Some of the energy once consumed passes from the body as waste products in the form of feces and urine. Part of the energy assimilated is used as heat for metabolism. The remainder is available for maintenance, such as capturing or harvesting food, performing muscular work, and keeping up with wear and tear on the animal's body. Energy used for maintenance is eventually lost to the surrounding environment as heat. Energy left over from maintenance and respiration goes into production, including growth of new tissues and production of young. This is what we call secondary production. Trophic cascade occurs when a predator in the food web suppresses the abundance of their prey such that it increases the abundance of the next lower trophic level on which the intermediate species feeds. Within a given ecosystem, there is considerable variation among consumer organisms in their efficiency in transforming energy consumed into secondary production. Assimilation efficiency is a measure of the efficiency with which the consumer extracts energy from food. Production efficiency is a measure of how efficiently the consumer incorporates assimilated energy into secondary production. Production efficiency varies mainly according to taxonomic class. Invertebrates generally have high efficiency, losing relatively little energy in respiratory heat and converting more assimilated energy into production. Ectotherms have intermediate values of production efficiency of approximately 10%, in comparison with endotherms that only convert 1 to 2% of their assimilated energy into production. Organic compounds fixed by autotrophs are the source of energy on which the rest of life on Earth depends. This energy is passed along the ecosystem in the food chain. The food chain consists of many levels. Occupying the first trophic level are the primary producers, which includes plants. The second trophic level is occupied by the herbivores, or the first level consumers. The higher levels are occupied by the carnivores, or the second level consumers. Some consumers occupy a single trophic level, but many others, such as omnivores, occupy more than one trophic level. Major feeding groups are based on common source of energy: autotrophs, herbivores, and carnivores. There are two major food chains in the ecosystem: the grazing food chain and the detrital food chain. For the grazing food chain, the source of energy is living plant biomass, and the energy flow in this food chain is unidirectional. For the detrital food chain, the source of energy is dead organic matter, and unlike the grazing food chain, the energy flow in the detrital food chain is not unidirectional. Ecosystem efficiency. Organisms in the ecosystem sustain each other by passing along energy from one organism to another within an ecosystem. This happens because of the consumption, ingestion, assimilation, respiration, and production of the organisms in the food web. There are three estimates of efficiency used to quantify and track the fate of energy flow through the food chain. Consumption efficiency, assimilation efficiency, and production efficiency. They are the values of the portion of energy being consumed, a portion assimilated from what's ingested, and a portion of the assimilated energy used for growth, respectively. These values of efficiencies are used in order to track the fate of energy available as it is passed through the trophic levels. Consumption efficiency determines the pathway of energy flow through the ecosystem. The relative importance of the two major food chains, grazing and detrital, as well as the rate of energy flow through the different trophic levels, vary with the types of ecosystems. Forest, grassland, stream, and open waters, for example, vary in the primary production removed by primary consumers, or the herbivores. The detrital food chain dominates in terrestrial ecosystems, with only a small proportion of net primary productivity being consumed by herbivores. In open water ecosystems, such as lakes and oceans, a greater proportion of primary productivity is consumed by herbivores. When energy transfers from one organism to another, from a plant to a bunny, or from a bunny to a fox, the vast majority of that energy is lost along the way.
Every ecosystem contains producers, or sometimes called primary producers, who get their energy from the sun and make their own food. Primary consumers, which eat the primary producers. Secondary consumers, which eat the primary consumers. And tertiary consumers, which eat the secondary consumers. And all of these organisms require energy and matter to live, and they get their energy and matter from the previous level, except of course the producers, who get their energy from the sun and their matter from the air and the water and the soil. So let's look at primary producers, and let's say that primary producers, because they get their energy from the sun, they get 100% of the available energy for them. All of the energy from the sun that hits them, they absorb. Well, they are going to send some of that energy to the primary consumers when the primary consumers eat them. Now, do the primary consumers get all of that energy? No, they do not. They only get about 10% of the energy. Where does the other 90% go? Well, most of the energy in the primary producers gets lost as heat from the primary producers using that energy, and then ultimately the energy gets converted into thermal energy. And remember However, the energy can't be destroyed, so any energy that the producer uses will, even if it uses it, it will get turned into heat eventually. So 90% of the energy gets lost as heat. Now the primary consumers will get eaten by secondary consumers, and it's about the same amount. About 10% of the 10% will go to the secondary consumers. So 10% of 10% is 1%. So secondary consumers have about 1% of the energy that was found in the producers. And again, the primary consumers, most of their energy will get lost as heat. And then the tertiary consumers will get 10% of the secondary consumers' energy, so 0.1%, and the rest will get lost as heat. So in every step, you have 10% of the energy moving on and 90% being lost as heat. So that means that eventually you can't get very high. Most food chains only go to the fourth consumer level, the quaternary consumer, because there's so little energy left over that if there was another organism eating that organism, it wouldn't have enough energy to survive. So 10% gets passed on, 90% gets lost as heat.
Each organism only holds 10% of the energy they ingest. The rest of the energy is consumed to allow the organism to live. The energy is then lost as it is passed along. That's why energy decreases in each successive trophic level. However, ecosystems are not governed by some simple principle that regulates a constant proportion of energy reaching successive trophic levels.